Hello and welcome to this talk on generating 3D structures using a 2D slice with GANs-based dimensionality expansion. My name is Steve Kench and I'm a PhD student at Imperial College London working in the Tools for Learning Design and Research group with Sam Cooper. So this paper was published in Nature Machine Intelligence, but it's also available from arXiv at the links given in the description. You can also find our Twitter handle on our group website where you can find out more about the projects we're involved in at the moment. So first I'm going to talk about our motivation for this project. As the title says, it's all about generating 3D volumes from a single 2D slice. So in the field of material science, volumetric 3D datasets are really important because we can learn a lot about how material behaves and why it behaves in a particular way by doing modeling on those 3D datasets. For example, in this slide on the left, you can see a picture of a battery, and on the right, a zoomed in image of the electrode and the structural composition of its components. So properties like how far your electric vehicle battery can take you, how often you need to recharge, and how long it takes you to recharge it can really be strongly influenced by the arrangement of those particles within electrodes. So we want to understand better those property performance relationships, and that means doing 3D modeling. But in order to do 3D modeling, we need 3D datasets. And in order to obtain 3D datasets, we have to do 3D imaging. Now, unfortunately, 3D imaging is often slower and limited to lower resolutions compared to their 2D counterparts. So it would be really nice if we could take some high-resolution 2D images of a battery, project those features up into 3D and do some high-fidelity modeling where we can extract some subtle microstructural effects on performance. So SliceGAN is an algorithm that was designed to do just this. So SliceGAN is designed based on generative adversarial networks, which are a machine learning method that are very good at emulating real data sets and producing realistic looking equivalents. So for example, generative adversarial networks have been used a lot for producing fake images of faces, fake images of animals or scenery and things like that. So we want to take that concept and apply it in the field of material science and extend it so that instead of just taking a 2D image and producing more 2D, we can take a 2D image and produce 3D data. So on the left of this slide, you can see the type of data we might be using, and on the right, you can see a generated 3D volume. But it's important to note we can't directly compare the realness of that 3D volume to a 2D slice because of that dimensionality and compatibility. We can't put both of those samples into the same neural network. So to get around this, what SliceGAN does is it takes slices along the X, Y, and Z direction of that fake generated sample and compares those to the real dataset instead. And after this, we can train our GAN in a pretty conventional way, and it learns to generate 3D volumes that look there where each slice looks realistic instead of comparing the volume as a whole. So here you can see some examples of the results when we applied SliceGAN to a range of different microstructures. At the top, you can see a grain-like structure, then a perovskite, and then a carbon-reinforced matrix. And in terms of the columns on the far left, you can see the training data. Then the next column is an example of a 3D reconstruction by SliceGAN, and then some slices through that reconstruction, just to compare the training data to those synthetic generations. And on this next slide, you can see some further examples in EBSD, which shows the ability to do color images, a surface, which is a synthetic material that we generated, and also finally a lithium-ion tomography, which is the electrode from the battery that I was showing you earlier. So this demonstrates the range of possible microstructures we can reconstruct. And the one real strength of this approach is that you don't have to change the approach based on what type of microstructure you're using. All of these went through this exact same process. So there's no human choice for extracting statistical features. It's just the same process, and that makes it much more universally applicable. So fortunately, because this is a video presentation, I can also show you some pretty 3D representations of these images. So the first one here is that separator material that I showed you in the previous slide. On the left, you can see the training image that we used, and on the right, you can see the 3D generated version. Now, in reality, this is just a single instance that our generator made, and we can produce a load of different instances. Just like a generator could produce different types of face, we can produce different instances that all look like this microstructure. Next, we have a perovskite. And you can see again that the shape and size of the material volume that we produce can also be varied, which is again really useful for modeling because we might want a very large volume to model. Last of all, we have the lithium-ion cathode material. Now on the left, you can see this training data is actually three-dimensional, and that's really useful because it allowed us to do some statistical comparisons of the training data to the synthetic realizations. In reality, we only used a single slice of that training data to train my GAN. So here are some of those statistical analyses of the properties of our lithium-ion real training sample versus our lithium-ion generated synthetic sample. And you can see that in general, the properties in terms of volume fraction of the different phases, the surface area of those different phases, and then relative diffusivity, which is a measure of how easy it is for lithium ions to percolate through that material and intercalate into the lithium, are all agree very well between the training data, the SliceGAN version, and also in the middle of each of those sets, we have a 3D to 3D GAN just for comparison purposes. So hopefully these results show that SliceGAN is able to reconstruct materials relatively accurately, at least in the cases that we've shown. Now, just before I wanted to discuss a few of the other contributions that this paper made. So one of the most important ones was looking at the differences in what we require of a generator when we're trying to make materials versus when we're trying to do something like make a face. Now, one of the biggest differences between these two scenarios is that when you're generating a face, the edges of the image don't tend to matter as much as the center where we generally have our objects of interest. In the case of a material, the edges can, and almost always are, equally as important as the center of the image. What this means is that we need our generator to behave the same and just as well around the edge regions as in the center. This image over here in this slide shows information density within a neural net. So it's a measure of how many parameters contribute to the final pixel in this image. So you can see those darker regions around the edge correspond to regions which have less parameters contributing to them, and therefore we tend to get a degradation in quality around the edges of our images. And this can be really detrimental for modeling because it can change the results and really have a strong effect on the performance that we perceive from our material. So in order to get around this paper discussed the 3 rules that we can use in order to avoid having this non-even information density. Those rules relate to the types of convolution that we use. So, for example, the kernel's size, the stride, and the padding that has to be used in a transpose convolution to ensure that flat information density. So thanks very much for listening to this talk. I hope you found it interesting. In summary, we can generate really high resolution, large volumes of 3D data from a single slice. It's an algorithm that's applicable to a range of different types of data sets, and it gives us very high speed generation times, which is really useful for modeling and optimization purposes.